William Carr, Pawns in the Game, ch. 1. Guy Carr Pawns in the Game. Chapter 1 The World Revolutionary Movement WRM. In order to understand the causes in the past, which have produced the effects we experience today, especially in regard to the unsatisfactory state of national and international affairs, history must be studied because history does repeat itself. History repeats itself because there has been perfect continuity of purpose in the struggle which has been going on since the beginning of time between the forces of good and evil to decide whether the rule of Almighty God shall prevail, or whether the world shall literally go to the devil. The issue is just as simple as that. It is a fact that both the forces for good, and the forces for evil, have been divided and split into factions. These factions often oppose each other in an effort to reach a common goal. This makes a study of the subject complicated. These differences in opinion have been produced by propaganda, which is used more often for spreading lies and half-truths, than it is used as a medium for telling the plain unvarnished truth regarding any given event or subject. Warmongers have used propaganda to divide human beings into opposing camps on political, social, economic and religious issues so they could stir them up into such a state of emotionalism that they will fight and kill each other. In order to discover the causes which have produced the effects we experience today, all available evidence must be studied carefully. Truths must be separated from falsehoods, and fiction from fact. Past events must be studied to see how they have affected and influenced conditions existing today. The human race is divided into two main camps as far as religion is concerned. Those in one camp believe in the existence of a God. Those in the other camp deny the existence of a supreme being of any kind. This fact is of major importance, because it will be proved that all wars and revolutions have been the result of one group or another trying to force their ideologies upon the people of the entire world. The conception of God varies with different sects. Theism teaches that God is a personal being and the author and ruler of the universe. Pantheism identifies God with the universe but not as a personal being. Pantheists believe in the doctrine of the universal presence of the divine spirit in nature. A kind of pantheism has found its way into many religious and philosophical systems. Buddhism and Hinduism both partake of this doctrine. Belief in a personal God includes belief in a celestial world, belief in the soul and life in the celestial world after the death of our mortal bodies. People who believe in a personal God must of necessity believe in the existence of Satan, a personal devil. A study of comparative religions proves that, as far as it is possible to probe back, even the members of isolated tribes have always had a religious instinct which caused them to discuss and ponder the questions: why were we born? For what purpose do we live? What ends do we serve? Whither do we go when we die? Even the most backward tribes of Central Africa and Australia seem to have had no doubts regarding the existence of God, a spiritual world and another existence for their own souls, after the death of their mortal bodies. A study of comparative religions also indicates that most, if not all, religions which teach belief in a supreme being, started out on a more or less uniformly high level in which the worship and love of Almighty God, respect for our elders and parents, love for our neighbors, i.e., benefactors, and the offering of prayers for deceased relatives and friends formed the basic principle. Evil men, actuated by motives of selfishness and greed and the desire for power, caused nearly all religions to deteriorate to the levels we find at them today. Some religions deteriorated as far as having priests sacrifice human beings as their offerings to God. Even Christianity, which is one of the most recent religions, deteriorated. Christianity has been split up into many factions, denominations, and it would require a great deal of imagination to picture the vast majority, who profess to be Christians today, as true soldiers, or followers, of Jesus Christ. Generally speaking, Christianity has deteriorated in regard to the practice of good works. This becomes a matter of major importance when we study the struggle going on between the forces of good and evil today, because the practice of good works created neighborliness, and brought about unity in the Christian fold. The real definition of the word neighbor is a person who has proved himself your benefactor, a person upon whom you can rely, a person who, you are certain, wouldn't do you any harm under any circumstances. That man or woman is your neighbor. The scriptures tell us we must love our neighbor as ourselves for God's sake. The only way to make good neighbors is to perform good works unselfishly. Lack of individual good works means lack of unity and lack of the proper community spirit. Today we have adopted the cold checkbook type of doing good works. We leave the performance to professional social welfare workers. This has justified the use of the term, as cold as professional charity. It is well to remember that even government social security legislation does not relieve individuals of the duties of neighborliness. Prayer without good works availeth a man nothing. In Christian weakness and disunity lies the atheistic strength. For one reason or another, many Christian denominations are fast losing their hold upon the youth of the so-called free nations. Each person lost to the Christian belief usually turns to secularism and often ends up as a fellow traveler in one or another of the atheistic ideologies of communism or Nazism. 1. The vast majority of professed Christians are not real soldiers of Jesus Christ, whereas every card-bearing member of either the Communist or Nazi parties must swear to give unlimited obedience to the leaders, to devote every waking hour to the furtherance of the cause, and contribute 1/10 of his, or her, income, towards financing the party's activities. While Christians are hopelessly divided into approximately 400 denominations, Communists and Nazis are all solidly united as anti-Christians. A continuation of this state of affairs cannot help but enable the leaders of one or another atheistic group winning world domination. When they do so, they will enslave body, soul and mind, all who refuse to accept their heathen ideology. The Illuminati will then impose the despotism of Satan. There is a great similarity in the beliefs of those who worship a supreme being, regarding the origin of man. The majority believe that the Great Father peopled this world for the purpose of giving the less culpable of those who followed Lucifer during the heavenly revolution another chance to decide, of their own free will, whether they will accept God's authority, and give him unlimited obedience or, literally, go to the devil. It is such beliefs that sustain such despised sects as Doukhobors in their passive resistance to man-made laws which they consider are contrary to God's divine laws. It is well to remember that the name Lucifer means holder of the light, a very brilliant being, the brightest of the angels. Notwithstanding these special gifts and privileges, he revolted against the supremacy of Almighty God. Most people, other than atheists and Darwinists, accept the story of the creation. There are, however, a great many different opinions regarding the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Many students of comparative religion argue that it is likely God created many worlds, and many Adams and Eves, and placed them in locations where they could reproduce their kind and populate the planets upon which they lived. The fact that human beings are placed on this earth by a method and process of birth, which prevents them having any knowledge of a previous existence, fits in with this theory. All we know, regarding the period before creation, is what has been revealed to us as told in the scriptures. It really doesn't matter a great deal if there was one or many Adams and Eves. The important thing to remember is the fact that all human beings have been given a free will and must decide for themselves whether they believe in a God and a devil, or if they believe in the atheistic materialistic ideology. Each and every human being must make up his, or her, mind one way or the other. If a person believes there is a God and a devil, then that person must decide which he is going to serve. An atheist, if he joins either of the totalitarian ideologies, serves the party and the state. He must give unlimited obedience to the head of the party and the state. The penalty for diversion is suffering, imprisonment, and possibly death. Belief in the existence of God automatically includes belief in supernaturally good and evil spirits which can influence men's minds for good or evil purposes. It is the struggle going on for the possession of men's souls that causes the conditions which prevail upon this earth today. The power of the devil was dramatically emphasized when he tempted Christ himself, while he was in the desert preparing himself for his ministry. Atheists, on the other hand, do not believe in the existence of supernatural beings. They argue that God has never been proved to exist. There are many groups of atheists. True communists, Grand Orient Masons, freethinkers, members of the League of the Godless, Illuminatists, nihilists, anarchists, true Nazi, too, and the Mafia. Many godless people subscribe to various forms of secularism, even if they fight shy of becoming active in the atheistic communists and Nazi groups. 3. Most atheists base their beliefs on the principle that there is only one reality, matter. That the blind forces of matter, sometimes referred to as energy, evolve into vegetable, animal, and man. They deny the existence of a soul, and the possibility of life, in another world, after the death of our mortal bodies. Evidence will be produced to prove that modern communism was organized in the year 1773 by a group of international money barons who have used it since, as their manual of action, to further their secret plans to bring about a totalitarian godless state. Lenin made this clear in his book Left-Wing Communism. On page 53, he said, "Our theory, communism, is not a dogma, settled doctrine, it is a manual of action. Many modern leaders have said and done the same things as Lucifer did during the Heavenly Revolution. There is no appreciable difference between red and black atheism. The only difference is in the plans used by the opposing leaders to ultimately win undisputed control of the world's resources, and bring into being their ideas for a totalitarian, godless, dictatorship. Karl Marx (1818–1883) was a German of Jewish descent. He was expelled from Germany, and afterwards from France, for his revolutionary activities. He was given asylum in England. In 1848 he published the Communist Manifesto. Marx admitted this long-range plan, to turn the world into an international of Soviet socialist republics, may take centuries to accomplish. Karl Ritter, 1779–1859, was a German professor of history and geopolitical science. He wrote the antithesis to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. He also drew up a plan by which he maintained the Aryan race could first dominate Europe and then the entire world. Certain atheistic leaders of the Aryan group adopted Karl Ritter's plan. They organized Nazism to further their secret ambitions to obtain ultimate control of the world and turn it into a godless state, under their conception of a totalitarian dictatorship. This small group of men knew they must either join up with, or destroy, the power and influence of the international bankers. It is doubtful if more than a mere handful of the top-level leaders of the communist and fascist movements know their organizations are being used to further the secret ambitions of the Illuminati, which are the high priests of Satanism. According to the leaders of both atheistic groups, the state must be supreme. This being so, the head of the state is God on earth. This belief brings into actual practice the deification of man. Much more is generally known about Karl Marx and communism than about Karl Ritter and Nazism. Ritter was for many years professor of history at Frankfurt University, Germany. Afterwards he taught geography at the Berlin University. In educational circles he was considered one of the greatest authorities on history, geography, and geopolitical science. Because the aims and objects of the leaders of the Aryan Party have always been kept secret, Karl Ritter's connection with the leaders and Nazism is very little known. Intelligence officers connected with the British government unearthed his connection with the Aryan warlords when studying political economy, geopolitical science, and comparative religions, in German universities. 4. This information was passed on to the proper authorities but, as so often happens, political leaders and diplomats either failed to realize the significance of what they were told or wished to ignore it. 5. Karl Ritter's study of history convinced him that a very small group of wealthy, and influential, international bankers, who gave allegiance to no country but meddled in the affairs of all, had, in 1773 organized Grand Orient Freemasonry for the purpose of using the world revolutionary movement to further their secret ambitions. Their long-range plan was for their group to gain ultimate control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. Their ultimate objective was to form a totalitarian dictatorship based on their theories of atheistic dialectical and historical materialism. Ritter claimed that most of, if not all, the international bankers were of Jewish descent, regardless of whether or not they practiced the Jewish faith. In his antithesis to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, he dealt with the dangers to be faced if this group of men were allowed to continue to control and direct the policies of international communism. He offered the German Aryan warlords very concrete, and practical, suggestions for defeating the conspiracy of the international money barons. 6. Professor Ritter gave the Aryan warlords an alternative long-range plan by which they could gain ultimate control of the world's resources for the Aryan races. To offset the plans of the international money barons, Karl Ritter advised the leaders of the Aryan groups to organize Nazism and use fascism, i.e. National Socialism, as their manual of action to further their secret ambitions for world conquest. Professor Ritter also pointed out that because the international bankers intended to use all phases of Semitism to further their plans, the Aryan leaders should use all phases of anti-Semitism to further their cause. Karl Ritter's long-range plan for ultimate world conquest included the following suggestions. 1. The subjugation of all European countries by Germany. To achieve this end, he suggested the German military junkers be encouraged and assisted to obtain control of the government so they could engage in a series of military adventures, interspersed with economic wars. The objective being to weaken the economy and manpower of the European nations to be subjugated. 7. Karl Ritter stated that it was not absolutely essential, to the success of his long-range plan, that each military adventure end in a clear-cut victory, provided the other nations involved were left in such a weakened condition that their recovery economically, and in strength of manpower, took longer than that of Germany. Karl Ritter stressed the importance of convincing the German people that they were physically and mentally superior to the Semitic races. From this thought, Aryan propagandists developed the idea of the German master race. They did this to counter the propaganda of the international bankers, which claimed the Semitic race is to be God's chosen people and divinely chosen to inherit the earth. The Aryan leaders promulgated the doctrine that their race was the master race on this earth. Thus, millions of people were divided into opposing camps. 2. Karl Ritter recommended a financial policy which would prevent the international bankers obtaining control of the economy of Germany and her satellite states as they had obtained economic control in England, France, and America. 3. He recommended the organization of a Nazi fifth column to counteract the communist underground organization. Its objective was to persuade the upper and middle classes of the countries they planned to subjugate to accept fascism as the only antidote to communism. German fifth columnists were to condition people in other countries to welcome the German armies as their military protectors against threatened communist aggression. Karl Ritter warned the leaders of the Aryan group that a military invasion of another country should never be undertaken until the fifth column and propaganda machines had thoroughly paved the way and convinced the majority of the people to accept their armed intervention as the act of saviors or crusaders, and not as aggressors. 8. 4. Karl Ritter cold-bloodedly recommended the total destruction of communism and the extermination of the Jewish race as essential to obtaining ultimate control of international affairs by the Aryan leaders. He justified this drastic stipulation on the facts of history, which he claimed proved communism was being used by the international Jewish bankers to further their own selfish materialistic ambitions. There were many more items making up the overall long-range plan, but in this chapter it is sufficient to produce enough evidence to unlock the door, behind which the secret plans of two small groups of totalitarian-minded, atheistic materialistic men were hidden. The study of comparative religions, geopolitical science, and political economy, and years of intensive research, revealed the truth that many millions of human beings have been used as pawns in the game by the leaders of the two atheistic totalitarian-minded groups, who will continue playing their hideous game of international chess until one or the other is eliminated. Evidence will be produced to show how this game has been conducted in the past, and what moves are likely to be made in the near future, to enable one group to win the game. The followers of all religions that teach the existence of God and life in a hereafter believe in the love and worship of God and charity towards all men of goodwill. Sincere believers will suffer any hardship and make any sacrifice in order to ensure their eternal salvation. The followers of atheism are taught to hate all who refuse to accept their materialistic creed. The determination of the leaders of both atheist groups to achieve world domination permits them to conceive the most diabolical conspiracies and perpetrate all kinds of crime, from individual assassinations to genocide. They foment wars in order to weaken nations they still have to subjugate. The study of comparative religions shows also that communism and Nazism are utterly incompatible with all religions that believe in the existence of an almighty God. Experience, and history, proves that those who believe in God, and those who deny his existence, are in such contradiction that neither can survive the triumph of the other. Atheistic leaders in subjugated countries may, for a time, tolerate religions which teach belief in God, but they only allow the priests to function on the social periphery. They take good care that the priests do not have the opportunity to influence the social and political behavior of their congregations. Evidence proves that the ultimate objective of both major atheistic ideologies is to obliterate from the minds of mankind, by persecution, and a systematically applied program of continuous brainwashing, all knowledge of a supreme being, the existence of a soul, and hope of life in a hereafter. These being facts, any talk of coexistence is either utter nonsense or propaganda. The trouble today is the continuation of the heavenly revolution. If God has placed human beings on this earth so they may know him, love him, and serve him in this life in order to be happy with him forever in the next world, then it is logical to reason that the only way in which Lucifer could hope to win back the souls in dispute would be to inoculate them with the doctrine of atheistic materialism. Undoubtedly many people will ask, but how could the devil inoculate the minds of men with atheistic and other evil ideas? That question can be answered in this way: if human beings call establish radio and television stations, from which one individual can influence millions of others by broadcasting his opinions on any given subject over the invisible airwaves, then why shouldn't it be possible for celestial beings to broadcast their messages to us? No brain specialist has dared to deny that in the brain of each individual there is some kind of mysterious receiving set. Every hour of every day human beings are saying, I was inspired to do this, or, I was tempted to do that. Thoughts, be they good or evil, must originate somewhere, from some cause, and be transmitted to the human brain. The body is only the instrument which puts the dominating thought for good, or for evil, into effect. One fundamental fact which all people, who believe in the existence of God, must never forget is this: if we are on this earth for a period of trial, if we have been given our free will, it is to enable us to decide whether we want to go to God or want to go to the devil. Therefore, if the devil did not have the opportunity to influence the minds of men, there would be no test. If Almighty God sent his prophets and his Son Jesus Christ, to show us clearly what is good and what is evil, then why wouldn't the devil send his false Christs and his false prophets to try and prove to us that evil is good and that good is evil? The simplest way to understand what is going on in the world today is to study the events of history as the moves being made in a continuing game of international chess. The leaders of the Illuminati have divided the people of the world into two main camps. They used kings and queens, bishops and knights, and the masses of the world's population, as pieces in their games. The ruthless policy of the leaders is to consider all other human beings as expendable, providing the sacrifice of a major piece, or a million pawns, places them a move nearer their ultimate totalitarian goal. The despotism of Satan. Professor Ritter is reported to have said the present phase of this game started in the counting house of Amschel Mayer Bauer alias Rothschild, located at Frankfurt on the Main in Germany, when 13 gold and silver smiths decided they must remove all the crowned heads of Europe, destroy all existing governments, and eliminate all organized religions, before they could secure absolute control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world, and establish a satanic despotism. Dialectical and historical materialism was to be used to further these plans. Strange though it may seem, history will prove that leaders of both the Semitic and anti-Semitic groups have on occasion joined forces to fight against a common enemy such as the British Empire or the Christian religion. And while the masses fought, the Illuminati, who constitute the secret power behind the world revolutionary movements, jockeyed for the best position from which they would derive the greatest future benefit. Are you trying to equate the British Empire with the Christian religion? Are you trying to tell me that evil empire, UK, the empire of the international money barons, is as good as the Christian religion? The leaders of both communism and Nazism have crossed, and double-crossed each other, but it is doubtful if many of the leaders realized, before it was too late, that even they were only tools controlled by the agentor of the Illuminati who use all that is evil to further their ends. When the secret powers heading either group, even suspect one of their tools, know too much, they ordered him liquidated. Evidence will be produced to prove that the leaders of these two groups of totalitarian-minded men have instigated many individual assassinations, and caused many revolutions and wars, in which tens of millions of human beings have been killed, while millions have been wounded and rendered homeless. It is difficult to discover a military leader who can justify the decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima or Nagasaki where, in the twinkling of an eye, approximately 100,000 people were killed, and twice the number seriously injured. The Japanese military forces had already been defeated. Surrender was only a matter of hours or days away when this diabolical act was perpetrated. The only logical conclusion is that the secret powers, who, it will be proved, influence and control the policies of most national governments, decided that this most modern of all lethal weapons had to be demonstrated to remind Stalin what would happen if he became too obnoxious. This is the only excuse which provides even the resemblance of justification for such an outrage against humanity. But the atomic bomb, and the hydrogen bomb, are no longer the world's most lethal weapons. Nerve gas, now being stockpiled by both communist and non-communist nations, is capable of wiping out all living creatures in a country, a city, or a town. The extent of destruction of all human life in a nation can be adjusted to the military and economic requirements of those who decide to use nerve gas to reach their goal. Nerve gas is said to be highly concentrated fluorine in its gaseous form. It is the most penetrating and deadly gas ever discovered by man. It is colorless, odorless, tasteless and economical to produce. One single drop, even when heavily diluted with water or oil, will, if it comes in contact with a living body, cause paralysis of the breathing apparatus, and death. In a few minutes it will penetrate even through rubber clothing such as is worn by firemen when on duty. Nerve gas will not seriously damage inanimate objects. Within a few days after the nerve gas had been applied, it would be safe for the invading force to enter the contaminated areas again. They would be areas of the dead, but all buildings and machinery would be intact. The only known antidote to nerve gas is the drug atropine. To be effective, it must be injected into the veins of the victims immediately, and repeatedly, after they have been contaminated. This means of defense is not practical for densely populated areas. Both communist and anti-communist governments have nerve gas. The knowledge that both sides have this gas in quantity may cause both sides to hesitate to use it. But it is a well-known fact that desperate, and ruthless, men will resort to any extremes to gain their objectives. And, as will be proved, they have never hesitated to sacrifice millions upon millions of human beings, men, women and children, if by doing so they advance themselves only one step nearer to their ultimate goal. We may well ask the question, how is the struggle now going on upon this earth going to end? It is doubtful if there is a single living being who hasn't asked this question. It is a question young married couples anxiously ask each other when they debate if they should allow their connubial bliss to bring more children into this hate-dominated world. The most complete answer is to be found in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 24, verses 15 to 34. At that time Jesus said to his disciples, "When you shall see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, he that readeth let him understand. Then they that are in Judea, let them flee to the mountains, and he that is on the housetop let him not come down to take anything out of his house, and he that is in the field let him not go back to get his coat. And woe to them that are with child, and give suck in those days. But pray that your flight be not in winter or on the Sabbath, for there shall be great tribulation such as hath not been from the beginning of the world until now, neither shall be, and unless those days shall be shortened no flesh should be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days shall be shortened." Christ then proceeded to deal with the problem of the false leaders and the antichrists who he foretold would use propaganda to befuddle men's thinking. He said, "Then if any man shall say to you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, do not believe him, for there shall arise false Christs and false prophets who shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch as to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told it to you beforehand. If therefore they shall say to you, Behold, he is in the desert, go ye not out. Behold, he is in the closet, believe it not. For as lightning cometh out of the east and appeareth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Wheresoever the body shall be, there shall the eagles be gathered together. And immediately after the tribulations of those days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall be moved, and the powers of heavens shall be shaken. 10. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, with much power and majesty, and he shall send his angels with a trumpet, and a great sound, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest part of the heavens to the utmost bounds of them. And from the fig tree learn this parable, when the branch thereof is now tender, and the leaves come forth, you know that summer is nigh. So you also, when you shall see all these things, know ye that it is nigh even at the doors. Amen, I say to you that this generation shall not pass till all these things shall be done. The branch is indeed now tender, many leaves have budded out, we need only one more war in which both sides use atomic and hydrogen bombs, and nerve gas, and we shall have inflicted upon ourselves the abominations of desolation which shall reduce the human race to such chaotic conditions that divine intervention will be our only salvation. Today it is common practice for people, especially those who act willfully or unwillfully, as the agents of the evil powers, to blame God for the sorry mess in which we find ourselves. The intelligent person will admit that God cannot be blamed. He gave us our free will, he gave us the commandments as our guide. He gave us Christ as a teacher and living example. If we obstinately refuse to accept the teachings and example of Christ, if we also refuse to obey the commandments of God, how can we reasonably blame any agency other than ourselves for allowing the forces of evil to gain supremacy in this world of ours? Edmund Burke once wrote, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil, is that good men do nothing." He wrote a great truth. The study of comparative religions, in relation to the conditions we are experiencing in the world today, brings the unbiased student to the conclusion that those human beings who worship God, and believe in another life after the death of our mortal bodies, enjoy a religion of love and hope. Atheism is a religion of hate and blackest despair. And yet, never before in the history of the world, has such a determined effort been put forth to introduce secularism into our lives as since 1846, when C.J. Holyoake, C. Bradlaugh, and others asserted their opinion, that human interest should be limited to concerns of the present life. These advocates of secularism were the predecessors of the most recent flock of false Christs and false prophets, Karl Marx, Karl Ritter, Lenin, Stalin, Hitler and Mussolini. These men did deceive millions upon millions of people by working great signs and wonders. They deceived many professing Christians who should have known better. 1. The terms Nazi and Nazism are used to indicate and identify the extremist members of the right-wing parties who gave allegiance and loyalty to the totalitarian-minded Aryan warlords who plotted to use fascism to further their secret plans and ambitions in exactly the same way as the international group, consisting of bankers, monopolists and certain politicians have used communism and all other groups, left, of center to further their secret plan and totalitarian ambitions. 2. The terms, true communist, and true Nazi, are used to identify the leaders and agents of the two totalitarian ideologies who have been initiated into the satanic ritual of Illuminism and Grand Orient Freemasonry or the pagan Aryan rites used by German Nazi military Grand Orient lodges. 3. The reader must realize the difference between Nazism and fascism because, contrary to what anti-fascist propaganda has led so many people to believe, the fascist movement, as started in Italy in 1919, was intended to be a Christian crusade to combat the atheistic ideology of Karl Marx and to support nationalism, as against internationalism, as planned by the leaders of both German Nazi warlords and the international bankers, industrialists and politicians. 4. The Aryan Nazi warlords must not be confused with the more moderate Junkers who were young Germans who took military training to protect what they considered Germany's national, political and economic rights as threatened by international-minded groups. 5. One of Britain's greatest intelligence officers is godfather to my daughter Eileen. I have known him intimately since October 1914. I served with him, on occasions, in both world wars. He and I both investigated this angle of Nazism independently, but when we checked our evidence we found we were very close to complete agreement. 6. The term, international money burns is used to define the international group of men who control international banking, industries, and trade and commerce. They are the men who have used communism to destroy constituted authority, and existing political and religious institutions, in order that they may ultimately usurp undisputed control of the world's resources for themselves. 7. This is an illustration of how the anti-communist extremists also use the joint stock company principle, and use others to serve their purpose while the actual directors and instigators remain hidden and unknown to the general public. 8. When Hitler acted contrary to the fundamental principles laid down by Karl Ritter, the German generals who belonged to the hard core of the Nazi leaders tried to have him assassinated, regardless of the fact that they had originally set him up as the instrument of their will. 9. All goldsmiths were not Jewish. Only some turned to the practice of usury. One of the richest goldsmiths is that of the London City Company dating from 1130. 10. The Greek word for heavens is oraner, from which the planet Uranus and metal uranium are named. This predicts the A and H bombs.